The wind screamed across the Hindu Kush Mountains, carrying dust and dread in equal measure. Commander Scott Wilson squinted through his binoculars at the distant compound nestled between jagged cliffs. His weathered face, carved by 27 years of military service, betrayed nothing. But inside, doubt gnawed at him like shrapnel. 2.7 kilometers, he muttered, lowering the binoculars, through 3 different wind corridors. In these conditions. Staff Sergeant Jenkins checked his instruments again and shook his head. Barometric pressure dropping, wind gusts at 34 knots shifting every 17 seconds. Tech's not sinking either. Lieutenant James Reed, the team's primary sniper, studied the satellite imagery spread across their makeshift command table. His reputation preceded him, 13 confirmed kills above 1,500 meters, a SEAL team legend. But even he looked concerned. "With all due respect, sir, it's not doable," Reed said, tapping the map where their high-value target was hiding. "Not with conventional methods. Not by anyone on this team." Wilson knew Reed was right. The mission parameters were beyond extreme. Eliminate Farhad Nazari, the mastermind, behind 3 embassy bombings without alerting his guards. The terrorist leader only appeared briefly each day at his compound window, a fleeting shadow behind bulletproof glass, with a narrow opening at the top for ventilation. Miss the shot, and Nazari would disappear into the mountains, taking his network of terror cells with him. "Command wants this done clean," Wilson said. "No drone strike, no team insertion, just 1 shot, 1 kill." "Then Command should send us a miracle," Reed replied. As if in answer, the radio crackled to life. "Outpost Sierra, this is Black Hawk 7, inbound to your position, ETA 3 minutes. Special package aboard. Authorization code Echo Tango Whisper." The men exchanged glances. Wilson recognized the classification immediately. Whatever was coming wasn't in the standard playbook. "Copy Black Hawk 7. Landing zone is clear. Winds from the east at 30 plus. The helicopter appeared as a dark speck against the Afghan sky, fighting the turbulence as it descended. When it landed, dust swirling in violent eddies, the side door slid open. 2 figures emerged, one tall and lean, the other older, moving with the practiced economy of a veteran soldier. Wilson stepped forward, squinting through the dust cloud. His eyes widened in recognition. "Master Chief Harkins." The older man nodded once his face tanned leather beneath a weathered ball cap. At 72, John Harkins should have been fishing on some quiet lake, not standing on a remote Afghan outpost. His reputation was the stuff of legend, one of the original Desert Storm snipers, with confirmed kills that remained classified decades later. "Commander Wilson," Harkins said, his voice gravel and whiskey. "Been a long time. Baghdad, 2003, if I recall." "I thought you retired after Desert Storm," Wilson said, unable to hide his surprise. Harkins' eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Some missions are more important than retirement." He gestured to the woman beside him. She was tall, lean, with dark glasses hiding in her eyes and a scarf wrapped against the wind. She carried no luggage, just a rifle case and a small weathered notebook. Her name tape read, "Hayes." "This is Diana Hayes," Harkins said. "She's your solution." Wilson accepted the manila folder Harkins handed him. Inside was a single page with a security classification he rarely saw. The code name at the top read Shadow Whisper. "She's not SEAL," Wilson said, scanning the minimal information. "Not even regular special forces from what I can see." "No, she's not," Harkins agreed. "She's something else entirely." Lieutenant Reed approached, measuring Diana with a skeptical gaze. She stood motionless, seemingly indifferent to his assessment. "No offense, ma'am," Reed said, "but we're talking about a shot most competition shooters wouldn't attempt on their best day. What makes you qualified?" Diana removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes of pale gray, cool as winter stone. "I don't need to be qualified, Lieutenant. I just need to do my job." Her voice was soft, but carried the quiet certainty of absolute confidence. Not arrogance, something else, something Wilson had rarely encountered. "Commander," Harkins said quietly, "may we speak privately?" Wilson nodded, leading Harkins to the command tent, while Diana remained outside, calmly unpacking her rifle case under Reed's watchful eye. Inside the tent, Wilson turned to Harkins. "What's going on, John?" "Who is she really?" Harkins glanced toward the tent entrance before answering. "Have you ever heard of the Whisper program?" Wilson shook his head. "Good, that means it worked." Harkins lowered his voice further. Back in the early 80s, during the height of the Cold War, the agency started looking for people with certain sensitivities, people who could feel things others couldn't. natural abilities that went beyond training. What kind of abilities? The ability to read wind patterns instinctively, to feel atmospheric pressure changes through the skin, to calculate trajectories, not with mathematics, but with intuition. Wilson frowned. Sounds like science fiction. So did satellite targeting and stealth technology once, Harkins countered. The program identified children with these aptitudes and developed them. Most washed out. A few became exceptional specialists. And Hayes, Diana is the best I've ever seen. Harkin's voice softened with something like pride. I found her when she was 12, living on a ranch in West Texas. Her father was Army Rangers wounded in Grenada. She could tell you which way the wind would shift minutes before it happened. Could feel a storm coming a day away. And you recruited a child. Wilson couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Harkins didn't flinch. I mentored her, trained her. When she was old enough, she enlisted. The program took over from there. This program, it's still active. Officially, no. It was supposedly shut down in '97. Unofficially, Harkins shrugged, there are operations that never make it into any record, Commander. You know that as well as I do. Wilson studied the older man. Why her? Why now? Because Nazari needs to be eliminated and the shot you're asking for can't be made by conventional means. Harkins met Wilson's gaze steadily. You've heard stories about the ghost of Karangol. Wilson stilled. The ghost was a whispered legend, a sniper who had eliminated 14 high-level targets in the Karangol Valley without ever being spotted. Shots that defied physics made in conditions that should have been impossible. That was a myth, Wilson said. Harkins just looked at him. Hayes, Wilson asked, disbelieving. She's the ghost. Give her a chance, Scott. That's all I'm asking. Outside, Diana had assembled her weapon, a heavily customized Remington MSR with modifications Wilson had never seen before. The scope alone looked hand-machined with the custom turrets and a specialized lens coating. Reed stood nearby, arms folded across his chest, skepticism radiating from his posture. Custom 338 Lapua, Reed noted. With those modifications, it's a nice range toy, but this isn't a competition shoot. Diana didn't respond. She opened her notebook, revealing pages of handwritten calculations, wine maps and sketches of terrain features. You planning to use that notebook to stop the wind? Reed pressed. Because that's what you'll need. My rangefinder can't even hold calibration in these gusts. Diana glanced up. I don't need a rangefinder, Lieutenant. Right, Reed scoffed. You just feel it in your bones. Not my bones, Diana replied quietly. The air, the mountain, they tell me everything I need to know. Reed rolled his eyes. Commander, he called as Wilson emerged from the tent, permission to continue mission prep with equipment that actually works. Wilson studied Diana for a long moment. She met his gaze without defensiveness or challenge, just that same unshakable certainty. Hayes, he said finally, what do you need for this operation? Just quiet, sir, she replied, and time to listen. Diana's childhood had been a study in stillness. Growing up on the isolated ranch in West Texas, she'd spend hours watching dust devils dance across the plains, feeling the subtle pressure changes against her skin. Her father, before the injury that put him in a wheelchair, had taught her to shoot when she was 6. Not just to aim and fire, but how to breathe. The rifle isn't your weapon, he'd say, adjusting her stance gently. Stillness is. They trained not on a range, but in the open fields behind the barn using tin cans on fence posts. Diana would lie flat in the grass for hours waiting for the wind to pause. She didn't fidget, didn't whine. If she missed a shot, she simply reloaded and tried again. When John Harkins first visited, he'd been her father's old Army buddy coming to pay respects. But he'd stayed for dinner, then watched as Diana practiced her shooting. Something in her technique had caught his attention. She doesn't calculate the shot, he'd said to her father later, not knowing Diana was listening from the hallway. She feels it. Harkins began visiting regularly, bringing books on ballistics, teaching her to read wind patterns in grass movement, cloud formations, dust behavior. He never mentioned the program, not until years later, but he was preparing her all along. At 17, with her father's reluctant blessing, she enlisted. By 19, she had disappeared into a specialized training program that officially didn't exist. For the next decade, Diana learned to refine her natural abilities into something extraordinary. While other snipers relied on technology and formulas, she developed what her instructors called atmospheric intuition, a near supernatural ability to read environmental conditions and adapt instantaneously. At Fort Benning, she shocked instructors with near-perfect target scores even under simulated stress conditions. Rain, mud, uphill, downhill, she never faltered. While others struggled with scope fog and wind drift, Diana adjusted her aim using only instinct. Her success came at a price. The constant training isolated her from normal relationships. The secrecy of the program meant no recognition, no record of her achievements. She became a ghost long before Korengal Valley, silent and self-contained, her entire existence focused on the perfect shot. And then came Damascus, the mission that changed everything. The outpost buzzed with quiet activity as Diana prepared for her observation. She'd spent the morning walking the perimeter, dropping small, colored threads into the air, watching their dance before falling. No measuring devices, no electronics, no apps, just observation. Wilson found her kneeling at the highest point of the outpost, eyes closed, face turned into the wind. "We've got satellite updates on the target," he said. "Nazari follows a regular pattern, appears at the window for approximately 12 seconds between 06:05 and 06:10 each morning. Bulletproof glass except for the top ventilation slot." Diana nodded without opening her eyes. "Hayes poem." Wilson hesitated. "I need to know if you can make this shot." She finally looked at him, her expression calm. "I don't take shots I can't make, Commander." "That's not an answer." "I'll observe through tonight. By morning I'll know." Wilson studied her. "Reed thinks this is a waste of time, that we should be preparing a different approach." "What do you think?" she asked. The question surprised him. "I think Harkins wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't believe in your abilities. But I've seen a lot of specialized operatives make big claims and fall short when it matters." Diana nodded, accepting his skepticism without offense. "Fair assessment." "Prove me wrong tomorrow," Wilson said. It wasn't a challenge, more like permission. As he turned to leave, Diana spoke again. "Commander, when the shot comes, no one will hear it. No one will see it. That's by design." Wilson paused. Meaning don't wait for a bang, just watch for the impact." By dusk, Diana had established her position on a flat rock outcropping with clear sight lines to the target compound. Her rifle was assembled, but not yet positioned. Instead, she sat cross-legged, making notes in her book as the light faded and temperatures dropped. Sergeant Jenkins approached, carrying a thermal blanket. "Ma'am, nights get cold up here. Thought you might need this." Diana accepted it with a nod of thanks. "Some of the guys were wondering." Jenkins hesitated. "Is it true you're the ghost of Korengal?" Diana's expression didn't change. "Ghosts don't exist, Sergeant." "Right." Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. "It's just there are stories about shots that couldn't be made, targets dropping with no sound, no trace of where the bullet came from." "People like stories," Diana replied, "especially in war zones." Jenkins nodded, taking the hint. As he turned to go, Diana added, "The thermal layers in these mountains trap sound. A properly modified subsonic round following certain trajectory paths won't produce an audible report at the target location. Physics, not ghosts." Well, Jenkins smiled slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Physics." After he left, Diana returned to her observations. The real work was beginning as darkness fell, reading the night wind patterns, calculating how they would shift with morning sun. She didn't just watch the compound. She studied how air currents swirled between ridgelines, how temperature variations created invisible rivers of movement in the atmosphere. At midnight, Harkins brought her a thermos of coffee. "You should rest," she said without looking up. "So should you," he countered, easing down beside her with a grunt that betrayed his age. "I'll sleep after." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had spent more time in each other's company than most fathers and daughters. Finally, Harkins spoke. "Damascus still bothers you." It wasn't a question. Diana's hands stilled on her notebook. "Michael would be alive if I'd taken the shot," she said. "You weren't sure." I hesitated. "The wind shifted, but I should have adjusted faster." Harkins sighed. "You made the right call with the information you had. The wrong outcome doesn't change that." Diana closed her notebook. "I promised myself afterward. Never again. I only pull the trigger when I'm 100% certain. And tomorrow, She gazed toward the distant compound, barely visible in the darkness. Ask me at dawn. Lieutenant Reed found Diana at Bo 400 still in position, now lying prone behind her rifle. The stars were fading as pre-dawn gray touched the eastern sky. You've been here all night, he asked, kneeling beside her. Yes. Her voice was clear, showing no signs of fatigue. Reed settled his own spotting scope next to her position. Commander asked me to observe. No offense, but I still think this is a long shot. Literally. Diana made a small adjustment to her scope. Your expertise is noted, Lieutenant. Look, I don't mean to be an ass, Reed said, his voice softening slightly. But I've been making difficult shots for 15 years. I know what's possible and what isn't. Based on your training, Diana acknowledged, I was trained differently. Reed studied her profile in the growing light. Harkins mentioned the ghost of Karangal. That true? Diana didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet. Does it matter? It matters if I'm about to witness the impossible or a spectacular failure. There's nothing impossible about what I do, Lieutenant. Just a different understanding of physics. The rising sun painted the mountains in golden shadow. Reed checked his watch. Target window approaching. Wind conditions are still garbage. Diana's breathing slowed, becoming so shallow it was barely visible. Her eye remained fixed to the scope, her body completely still. Reed watched her through his own optics, noting her technique, the perfect cheek weld, the relaxed position of her trigger finger, the way she seemed to sink into the earth beneath her. 5 minutes to window, Reed murmured. Diana didn't acknowledge him. Her focus had narrowed to the target zone, but more than that, to the invisible currents between her position and the compound. In her mind, she visualized the path not a straight line, but a complex curve influenced by 3 distinct wind patterns: gravitational pull, the Coriolis effect, even the minute atmospheric pressure differences across 2.7 kilometers of mountain terrain. 2 minutes, Reed said, tension evident in his voice. I've got movement in the compound. Diana's finger moved slightly closer to the trigger, but her breathing remained unchanged. Through her scope, she saw the window, the small ventilation slot at the top. No sign of the target yet. 1 minute, Reed whispered. The first rays of direct sunlight hit the mountainside, beginning the daily temperature shift that would alter wind patterns within seconds. Diana felt it coming, the subtle change in air pressure against her exposed skin. Visual on target, Reed hissed. Window center room, male figure matching Nazari's description. Diana remained motionless. The shot wasn't ready. The air wasn't right. Reed tensed beside her. Take the shot, he urged. You've got him. Still Diana waited. 3 seconds passed. 5. The wind began its morning shift exactly as she had predicted during the night. The currents aligned, creating a momentary corridor through the chaos. Diana's finger moved a single millimeter. There was no crack of gunfire, no muzzle flash, no recoil visible to Reed's eye, just the softest mechanical click, so quiet it might have been imagined. Reed frowned, still watching through his scope. Did you His question was cut short as his earpiece crackled. Overwatch confirms impact. Target down. Clean hit through ventilation slot. No alert from compound security. Reed lowered his scope slowly, turning to stare at Diana. She was already sitting up, calmly removing the specialized suppressor from her rifle. How? Reed asked, his voice barely audible. I didn't even see you fire. Diana began disassembling her weapon. The bullet travels faster than sound. By the time you registered the shot, it was already over. But there was no report at all, no recoil. Modified subsonic round, custom suppressor, recoil absorption system. She placed the components carefully in her case. And timing. The wind created a sound corridor that channeled what little noise there was away from our position. Reed shook his head in disbelief. I've never seen anything like that. Diana closed her rifle case. Few have. Will you teach me? The question slipped out before Reed could stop it, naked professional admiration overcoming his earlier skepticism. Diana looked at him, really looked for the first time. Some of it can be taught, some can't. What made you take the shot when you did? Reed pressed. The conditions seemed identical to 30 seconds earlier. Diana stood, slinging her case over her shoulder. The wind told me when. She started walking back toward the outpost, then paused. Lieutenant, the shot was never impossible. It just needed to be understood. By midday, word of Diana's impossible shot had spread throughout the outpost. The satellite confirmation showed Nazari had been eliminated with a single round through the ventilation slot, hitting him with such precision that his guards assumed he'd collapsed from natural causes. By the time they realized what had happened, Diana's bullet had already completed its journey, leaving no trace of its origin. Inside the command tent, Wilson studied the mission telemetry while Harkins looked on. "It doesn't make sense," Wilson said, shaking his head. "The bullet's path should have been affected by at least 3 different crosswind patterns. Even with the most advanced ballistic computers, this shot shouldn't have been possible." "That's because Diana doesn't use computers," Harkins replied. "She uses something more reliable, which is intuition honed to scientific precision." Harkins tapped the satellite image. "She doesn't fight the wind, Scott. She works with it, waits for the exact moment when the currents align." Wilson leaned back, processing this. "And Damascus? What happened there?" Harkins' expression darkened. "A mission went bad. Diana and her spotter, Michael Sullivan, were sent to eliminate a high-value target. Conditions were similar to today, complex winds, extreme range. Diana wasn't certain of the shot and held fire. The target spotted their position. Sullivan didn't make it out. That's why she's so contained. She blames herself, hasn't missed since, but she'll only take a shot when she's absolutely certain." Harkins rubbed his jaw. "Problem is, Command is already asking for more. They've identified another target, Nazari's financial officer, even more heavily protected. Moves between 2 buildings on an unpredictable schedule." Wilson frowned. "They're pushing their luck." "No," Harkins corrected. "They're pushing hers." Outside, Diana sat alone at the edge of the outpost, looking out over the valleys below. She appeared relaxed, almost meditative, but her mind was working, processing what the mountain air was telling her about tomorrow's weather, tomorrow's wind. Reed approached carrying 2 MREs. He offered one to Diana, who accepted with a nod. "The boys are calling you Whisper now," he said, settling beside her. "Say you speak to the wind." Diana opened her meal without comment. "I owe you an apology," Reed continued. "I was out of line before. You were skeptical. That's your job. Still, what I saw today..." Reed shook his head. "I've never witnessed shooting like that." Diana took a bite of food, chewing thoughtfully before responding. "It's not about the shooting, Lieutenant. It's about patience. Waiting for the perfect moment, not creating it." They ate in silence for a while, watching the afternoon light play across the mountains. "I heard about Damascus," Reed finally said. "About Sullivan." Diana stilled. "I lost a spotter in Fallujah," Reed continued. "Missed a shot I should have made. Got him killed when the target's security team triangulated our position." Diana set down her fork. "I'm sorry." "The thing is," Reed said, "I keep thinking if I'd had better equipment, better intel, I could have made that shot. But you," he gestured toward her, "you know when not to shoot. That's harder sometimes." Diana studied him, seeing past the bravado to the genuine respect underneath. "The best snipers aren't the ones who take the most shots. They're the ones who take only the right shots." Reed nodded slowly. "Commander says there's another mission coming. Harder than today's." "There's always another mission," Diana replied, turning back to the view. "Always another shot." But as the sun began its descent behind the western peaks, Diana opened her notebook to a page Reed couldn't see. There, alongside wind calculations and trajectory notes, was a simple sketch of a man's face, Michael Sullivan, forever young, forever waiting for a shot that never came. Diana traced the outline with her fingertip, a ritual of remembrance. Then she closed the book and returned to studying the wind. Tomorrow would bring another target, another challenge. The past was fixed, but the future, like the wind, could still be read, still be understood, if one knew how to listen. The outpost hummed with activity as analysts pored over satellite imagery of Nazari's compound. His elimination had created a power vacuum, and intelligence suggested his financial officer, Malik Dawar, had stepped into the leadership role. Unlike Nazari, Dawar was cautious to the point of paranoia, moving between buildings, through covered walkways, appearing in the open for mere seconds at a time. Commander Wilson spread the new intelligence across the command table. "Dawar knows someone took out Nazari. He's adapted his routine accordingly." Diana studied the aerial photographs, her finger tracing the path between structures. "He still has to move between these buildings." "For approximately 4 seconds, Wilson confirmed, "and the path is partially covered. You'd have a 2-second window at most." Lieutenant Reed leaned over the images. And the range is even greater, 3,000 meters with a valley crosswind that gusts up to 40 knots. Diana made no comment, her eyes still fixed on the satellite imagery. She was calculating not just distance and wind, but the psychological profile of her target. Fear made men unpredictable. Paranoia made them predictable in different ways. "Can it be done?" Wilson asked directly. Diana finally looked up. "Yes." A new voice cut through the tent. "Confident as always, Ms. Hayes." They turned to see a man in civilian clothing standing at the entrance. Tall, lean, with the hardened physique of a career field operative. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Richard," Harkins said, his voice suddenly cold. "Didn't expect to see you in country." "Special circumstances," the man replied. "May I present myself, Richard Blackwood, Central Intelligence Agency. I've been overseeing the Whisper program's operations for the past 5 years." Wilson straightened. "I wasn't aware CIA had operational authority here." "Joint Task Force arrangement," Blackwood said, smoothly producing credentials. Given the success of yesterday's operation, Langley thought it prudent to provide additional resources. His gaze fixed on Diana. "Exceptional work, as always." Diana nodded, once her expression unchanged, but Harkins noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight narrowing of her eyes. She didn't trust Blackwood. Neither did he. "Commander Wilson," Blackwood continued, "might I have a private word agency business?" Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "My office." As they left, Harkins moved closer to Diana. "Did you know he was coming?" "No," she murmured, "but I'm not surprised." "Be careful what you tell him," Harkins warned. "Richard has his own agenda." "He always has," Diana replied, "ever since Moscow." Reed looked between them, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "What's the deal with this guy?" Harkins' expression darkened. "Blackwood believes assets like Diana are just that. Assets. Tools to be used, not people with choice." "And what do you believe?" Reed had asked. The old sniper's eyes softened as he looked at Diana. "I believe I made a mistake once bringing a young girl with special talents to the attention of men like Blackwood. I've been trying to make up for it ever since." In Wilson's makeshift office, Blackwood didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Commander. Diana Hayes isn't just a skilled sniper. She's the culmination of a 4-decade research program into enhanced human capabilities." Wilson kept his expression neutral. "Harkins mentioned the Whisper program." "Harkins told you what he knows," Blackwood said dismissively, "which isn't everything. What matters now is that we have a unique opportunity. Eliminating both Nazari and Dewar would destabilize their entire network. But there's more at stake, and such as..." Blackwood produced a tablet activating a secure file. "Operation Omega, the final phase of the Whisper program. With your permission, I'd like to initiate it here using the Dewar elimination as cover." "What exactly does that entail?" "A series of protocols designed to enhance Hayes' effectiveness." Blackwood's eyes gleamed with something that made Wilson uneasy. "She's been prepared for this since her initial training. All that's required now is activation." Wilson studied the man before him. 27 years in special operations had taught him to recognize when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. "I'll need to consult with Harkins first," Wilson said carefully. "And I want Hayes' input as well." Blackwood's smile tightened. "Of course, but I should warn you, Commander, this operation has been authorized at the highest levels. Your consultation is a courtesy, not a requirement." When Wilson returned to the command tent, the tension was palpable. Harkins stood with Diana on one side of the table, Reed on the other, an unspoken alliance already formed. "Blackwood wants to implement something called Operation Omega," Wilson said without preamble. "Says it's the final phase of your program, Hayes." Diana went very still. "John," Wilson turned to Harkins, "you know about this." The older man's face had gone gray. "I've heard rumors. Nothing concrete." "It's real," Diana said quietly, "and it's not happening." "Care to explain why?" Wilson asked. Diana exchanged a look with Harkins before answering. "Operation Omega involves certain modifications to the way I operate, psychological conditioning designed to remove emotional variables from the equation." "In English, please." "They want to turn me into a machine," Diana said flatly, "a weapon without conscience or hesitation." Harkins stepped forward. "Scott, you need to understand something. The Whisper program wasn't just training. There were experimental procedures involved, neural implants designed to enhance natural abilities. Wilson's eyes widened. They put something in your head. Diana nodded once. Nanoscale neural interfaces, dormant until activated. Operation Omega is the activation protocol. Jesus Christ, Reed muttered. The technology allows for enhanced perception. Diana continued, her voice clinical detached. But complete activation would also permit external control. They could override my decision-making process, remove my autonomy, make you pull the trigger even when you wouldn't choose to, Wilson translated. Yes. Wilson's jaw tightened, and Blackwood wants to activate this now for the Dewar operation. Dewar is just the excuse, Harkins said grimly. Once Omega is initiated, Diana becomes a controllable asset, the perfect assassin with no will of her own. The tent fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Wilson spoke. Not on my watch. He turned to Diana. Can you eliminate Dewar without this activation? Yes, she said without hesitation. Then that's how we proceed. Wilson's decision was immediate and firm. Reed, you'll provide overwatch support. Harkins, I want you coordinating from here. I'll run interference with Blackwood. He won't back down easily, Harkins warned. Neither will I. Wilson's eyes hardened. No one on my team becomes anyone's puppet. Not while I'm in command. As they dispersed to prepare for the operation, Diana caught Harkins' arm. He knows, doesn't he, about Damascus? Harkins nodded slowly. I think he suspects. Be careful, Diana. Richard always plays the long game. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in gold and shadow. Diana walked the perimeter again, this time with purpose, studying the shifting air currents as day transformed to night. The mountain wind carried stories to those who knew how to listen. Tales of pressure systems, colliding of warm air, rising from sun-baked valleys, of cold descending from snow-capped peaks. Reed joined her, carrying additional equipment. Commander suggested I observe your methods, if that's okay. Diana nodded. Watch if you want, but don't interfere. As darkness fell, she began her ritual. Small threads released into the air, tiny puffs of chalk dust to reveal invisible currents, all observed in silence while recorded in her notebook, with sketches that resembled music notation more than ballistic data. You're mapping the night wind, Reed realized, to predict morning patterns. Yes. But wind changes. How can you know what it'll do tomorrow? Diana looked up at the star-filled sky. Wind follows patterns, Lieutenant. Like a river has currents, air has channels. They shift, but not randomly. There's a rhythm. Reed watched as she made another notation. And you can hear this rhythm, feel it, against my skin, in changes of pressure. She paused. Some people naturally sense these things. The program enhanced that ability. With the neural implants Harkins mentioned, Diana's hand stilled on her notebook. Yes. Does it hurt? The question surprised her. Few had ever asked about her experience, her comfort. Most wanted only results. No, she said finally, but it changes how you perceive the world, like having an extra sense that never shuts off. Always aware of the air moving around you, pressure building or falling, temperature fluctuating. Reed considered this. An Operation Omega would amplify that. It would weaponize it, Diana corrected. The implants aren't just passive enhancers. They can interface with the brain's decision-making centers when fully activated. Mind control, Reed said bluntly. Essentially, though the CIA prefers terms like neural guidance or cognitive enhancement. Reed shook his head in disgust. And you've been carrying this around in your head for how long? Since I was 19. Christ. Reed looked at her with new understanding. And Blackwood, he's been waiting for a chance to flip the switch. The program was officially suspended in 1997, but Richard never accepted that decision. He's been pushing to reactivate key assets ever since he took over operational control. And you're the prize asset. Diana didn't respond, but her silence was confirmation enough. Why you, Reed pressed. There must have been others in the program. Diana closed her notebook. There were 27 candidates originally. By the final phase, only 3 remained. She paused. I'm the last one now. What happened to the others? Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Reed saw genuine emotion there. a profound sadness. One killed himself after his third mission. Couldn't reconcile what he'd become with who he'd been. She looked away. The other died in Damascus, Michael Sullivan. Reed stared. Your spotter was part of the program too. Diana nodded. We were paired because our abilities complemented each other. Michael couldn't read wind the way I could, but he had perfect spatial awareness, could track multiple moving targets, simultaneously calculate intersections, predict movement patterns. And when he died, the program lost half its investment. Diana finished, her voice hollow. That's how Blackwood saw it anyway. Reed wanted to press further, but Diana had already returned to her observations, her momentary openness gone. He recognized the shift, had seen it in combat veterans who'd shared more than they intended and then retreated behind professional distance. Instead, he simply stood beside her, watching in silence as she continued her methodical study of the invisible currents surrounding them. After a while, he found himself noticing subtle shifts in the air that he'd never perceived before, the way sound carried differently as temperature dropped, how the breeze followed contours of the mountain with almost liquid consistency. I think I feel it, he said softly. The pattern. Diana glanced at him, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Now you're listening. In Wilson's quarters, Harkins sat heavily on a folding chair, his age finally showing in the slump of his shoulders. I should never have brought her into this, he said, staring at his weathered hands. Back then it seemed like the right thing, a way to serve her country, use her gifts. Wilson poured 2 fingers of bourbon into metal cups. You couldn't have known what they had planned. I suspected. Harkins accepted the drink. The Cold War made us do things, Scott, things we justified in the name of national security. The Soviets had their program, psychic research, enhanced human performance, and we had to match them. Stay ahead. And Diana was part of that race. She was exceptional from the beginning. Not just the wind reading, though, that was remarkable. Her discipline, her focus, total commitment. Harkins took a swallow of bourbon. I told myself I was giving her purpose, structure, a way to channel Bale abilities that made her different. You care about her, Wilson observed, more than a handler should. Harkins nodded slowly. She became the daughter I never had, which makes my responsibility for her situation that much worse. What happened in Damascus, John? The real story. Harkins set down his cup. A high-value elimination similar to Nazari. Diana and Michael were deployed as a team. The target was a weapons dealer supplying terrorist cells throughout the region. And the shot was complex, multiple wind channels, extreme distance. Diana hesitated, waiting for optimal conditions. But while she waited, the target's security team detected Michael's electronic equipment. They never saw Diana, but they found Michael. Harkins paused. She could have taken the shot earlier, possibly eliminated the target before they found her position. But it wasn't a certain hit, and she wouldn't risk it. So Sullivan died because she wouldn't take a questionable shot? No. Harkins' voice hardened. Michael died because Blackwood insisted on using standard electronic surveillance equipment instead of trusting Diana's natural abilities. She wanted to go in with minimal gear, just as she did here. Blackwood overruled her. Wilson considered this. And now Blackwood wants to ensure she never hesitates again, by taking away her choice completely. Exactly. That's not happening, Wilson said firmly. Not while I'm in command. Harkins studied him. Blackwood has powerful friends, Scott, and the authority to override you if necessary. Let him try. Wilson's jaw set in a hard line. I've dealt with CIA overreach before. They don't dictate how my team operates in the field. A knock at the door interrupted them. Reed entered, his expression troubled. Sir, we may have a problem. Blackwood's on a secure satellite call in the comm tent. I overheard him say activation protocols are ready, and asset will be prepped by 0400. Wilson was on his feet instantly. Where's Hayes now? Still at her observation point. I left her about 10 minutes ago. Find her, stay with her. Don't let Blackwood or anyone else near her without my direct authorization. As Reed departed, Wilson turned to Harkins. How would they activate these implants? What's the procedure? I'm not certain, Harkins admitted, but it would likely involve a combination of chemical triggers and electronic stimulation. Specific compounds that react with the nanomaterials coupled with precisely calibrated signals. Could they do it without her cooperation? Harkins hesitated. Yes, the original protocols included contingencies for non-compliant activation. Wilson cursed under his breath. We need to move up the timetable. Get Hayes on target before Blackwood can implement whatever he's planning. Scott, Harkins warned, rushing a shooter like Diana is dangerous. She needs time to read the conditions, prepare mentally. We don't have that luxury anymore. Wilson grabbed his tactical vest. We adapt or we fail. Outside, the mountain night had turned bitterly cold, stars sharp as glass shards in the black sky. Reed found Diana still at her observation point, now lying prone, seemingly impervious to the freezing temperature. Hayes, he called softly, we need to move. Command says the operation timeline has changed. Diana didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was distant, focused elsewhere. The wind is shifting earlier than expected. Dawn patterns already establishing. That's fine, but we have another problem. Blackwood's up to something. Commander thinks he's planning to activate the Omega protocols before morning. This got her attention. Diana sat up, eyes suddenly alert. When Arrow 400 from what I overheard, that's less than 3 hours. She began gathering her equipment with quick, efficient movements. We need to move to the secondary observation point now. It's less optimal, but offers better concealment. I'll come with you. Diana shook her head. No, you're too visible and your equipment would register on thermal scans. I work alone. Commander's orders, Reed insisted. I stay with you. They locked eyes, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Diana nodded once. Minimal gear. Move exactly where I move. Complete silence. Reed followed as Diana led him along the ridgeline, moving with a ghost-like quietness that belied her speed. She chose paths that kept them in shadow, avoiding any open ground that might expose them to observation from the outpost. Blackwood will have surveillance assets, she explained in a whisper. Possibly satellite thermal imaging, definitely drone reconnaissance. You've evaded these before, many times. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they reached a natural depression in the mountainside that offered both cover and a clear line of sight to Dewar's compound. Diana quickly established her position, unpacking only essential equipment. This isn't a random escalation, she said as she assembled her rifle. Blackwood's been planning this. The question is why now? Reed settled beside her, scanning the surrounding terrain for any sign of pursuit. Maybe your success with Nazari convinced his superiors to greenlight Omega. No, Diana said, making minute adjustments to her scope. Richard doesn't need permission. He wants something specific from this operation. Like what? Diana paused, her hands stilling on the rifle. Damascus wasn't just a failed mission, Lieutenant. It was a test. Blackwood wanted to see if I would take an uncertain shot under pressure. When you didn't, he decided I needed to be fixed. Diana resumed her preparations. The implants were always designed with 2 operational modes: passive enhancement, which is how I've used them, and active control. And Dewar is important enough to justify activating the control mode. Diana's expression darkened. Dewar is just the excuse. Once Omega is initiated, it becomes permanent. The neural pathways are irrevocably altered. Reed processed this information. So we need to eliminate Dewar before Blackwood can implement Omega. Exactly. Can you make the shot from here without your usual preparation time? Diana completed her rifle assembly, then lay prone and aligning her sight picture with the distant compound. The wind is more complex than yesterday. 3 distinct current layers plus thermal uplift beginning at the valley floor. Is that a yes or a no? Diana didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, face turned slightly into the breeze. Reed watched fascinated as she seemed to enter a meditative state, her breathing slowing, body relaxing despite the tension of their situation. When she opened her eyes again, they held absolute certainty. Yes, I can make the shot, but we need to wait for the right moment. We may not have much time. We have enough. Diana checked her watch. Dawar follows a pattern. Every night at approximately 02:30, he moves from the main building to the communications hub for scheduled calls with his financial contacts in Pakistan. It's his most predictable movement. That's less than an hour from now. 53 minutes, Diana corrected. We wait. As the minutes ticked by, Reed found himself growing increasingly tense. Every sound from the valley below seemed amplified: the distant call of a night bird, the soft rustle of wind through sparse mountain vegetation. Diana, by contrast, became more still, more focused, her breathing so shallow it was nearly imperceptible. At precisely 0225, she made a small adjustment to her scope elevation. Preparing for target appearance, Reed raised his own spotting scope. No movement at the compound yet. There will be. First, the perimeter guards will change position, creating a temporary blind spot in their coverage. Then Dawar will emerge flanked by two bodyguards. As if summoned by her words, the guards at the compound began their rotation. Reed watched in astonishment as the scenario unfolded exactly as Diana had predicted. "How did you know? Pattern recognition," she murmured. "People are creatures of habit, especially in security protocols." Through his scope, Reed saw the door to the main building open. Movement at the primary structure. "Confirmed," Diana whispered. "Target identified." Dewar appeared surrounded by guards moving quickly across the short, exposed area between buildings. Even at this distance, Reed could make out the man's features through his high-powered optics. Middle-aged, bearded, moving with the cautious alertness of someone who knows he's being hunted. Diana's finger moved to the trigger, her breathing slowing further. But instead of taking the shot, she suddenly tensed. "Wind shift," she murmured. "Unexpected cross-current at mid-range." Reed couldn't feel anything different, but he trusted Diana's perception. "Can you compensate?" Calculating. Her left hand made a minute adjustment to the windage knob. "Ready?" Dewar was nearly at the second building now, only a second or two of exposure remaining. Reed held his breath, but again Diana didn't fire. "Hayes," he whispered urgently. "Wait," she commanded. Dewar disappeared into the communications building, the door closing behind him. Reed lowered his scope in disbelief. "You missed the window." "No," Diana said calmly. "That wasn't the window. The pattern is incomplete. He's inside now. How is that not a missed opportunity?" "Because he'll emerge again in approximately 40 minutes. His calls never last longer than 35 minutes, and he always returns to the main building to sleep." Reed stared at her. "You're sure, certain?" As they settled into wait, Reed couldn't help but admire Diana's confidence. Where most snipers would have taken the shot accepting the risk of a miss due to the unexpected wind shift, she remained patient, absolute in her conviction that a better opportunity would present itself. "Damascus," Reed said quietly. "It was like this wasn't it. You waited for the perfect shot." Diana's eyes remained fixed on her scope. "Yes, but Sullivan died because you waited." "No," and her voice hardened slightly. "Michael died because our position was compromised by electronic surveillance equipment I advised against using. The enemy detected his communications gear, not my rifle." Reed absorbed this. "So Blackwood set you up to fail." "I don't know if it was intentional," Diana admitted, "but he used the outcome to argue that my decision-making was flawed, that I needed to be optimized through full activation of the implants." "And what do you think?" Diana finally looked at him. "I think perfect certainty is worth waiting for, Lieutenant, especially when lives depend on it." At 0308, movement at the communications building caught their attention. Reed raised his scope again. "Target reappearing," he confirmed, "earlier than you predicted." Diana had already refocused through her scope. His call ended prematurely. Emotional response indicated he's moving faster than normal, pattern agitated. Reed could see it now. Dewar was walking quickly, gesturing sharply to his guards, his face contorted in anger. "Wind stabilizing," Diana murmured. "3 layers converging temporarily." Her breathing slowed again, fingers settling against the trigger with practiced precision. This time there was no hesitation. The softest mechanical click, barely audible even to Reed lying beside her, and Diana's specialized rifle discharged its round. Through his scope, Reed watched in astonishment as Dewar suddenly staggered, a small dark spot appearing at his temple before collapsing to the ground. The guards looked around in confusion, raising their weapons, but finding no target, no direction from which the shot had come. "Target eliminated," Reed whispered. "Clean hit." Diana was already disassembling her rifle movements, swift and precise. "We need to move, now." "Why Blackwood doesn't know where we are?" "He will soon." The shot signature was clean, but they'll still try to triangulate our position. As if confirming her words, the distant sound of a helicopter broke the night silence. Reed looked up to see a small drone appear over the ridge, its running lights dimmed. "Surveillance drone." Diana identified it, "searching for our heat signatures." She pulled a small device from her pack and activated it, tossing it 30 meters from their position. Immediately, the drone changed course, heading toward the device. "Thermal decoy," she explained. "It'll buy us a few minutes." They moved quickly back along the ridgeline, using natural features for cover. Diana led them down a steep ravine, then up the opposite side, following a path that seemed random, but which Reed gradually realized was carefully chosen to minimize their exposure to aerial observation. "You've done this before," he observed as they paused for breath in the shadow of a large boulder. "Many times," Diana confirmed. "Running from your own side is often harder than evading the enemy." "Where are we going?" "Back to the outpost." Diana checked her watch. "We need to reach Commander Wilson before Blackwood realizes what's happened." "Won't that be the first place they look for us?" "Yes, but it's also where we have allies." Diana started moving again. "Blackwood won't act openly against us there, not with witnesses present." As they approached the outpost, Diana suddenly pulled Reed down behind a rock outcropping. "Wait," she whispered. Moments later, a patrol passed by, two of Blackwood's men, not regular military carrying specialized equipment Reed didn't recognize. "Neural stimulation device," Diana identified it quietly. "Part of the Omega activation protocol." When the patrol had passed, they continued their careful approach, finally reaching the perimeter, where a surprise sentry challenged them. Lieutenant Reed and Specialist Hayes returning from mission. Reed identified them. The young soldier looked confused. "Sir Commander Wilson's been looking for you, said to notify him immediately if you returned." "Then do it," Reed ordered, "and make sure Master Chief Harkins knows as well." Inside the command tent, they found Wilson and Harkins in tense conversation. "Mission complete," Diana reported without preamble. "Dewar has been eliminated." Wilson's eyes widened. "Already how?" "Alternative observation point, accelerated timeline," Diana explained. "Lieutenant Reed provided excellent support." Harkins studied her face intently. "You're okay." "For now." Diana glanced around the tent. "Where's Blackwood Communications Hub?" Wilson replied. "Been there for the past hour, making calls to Langley. He thinks you're still at your original observation point. Had men preparing to bring you in at 0400. "For the Omega activation," Diana confirmed. "We intercepted and neutralized the target before he could implement his plan." Wilson nodded, impressed. "Quick thinking. But this doesn't end his threat. Blackwood will just regroup." "Try again." "Not if we expose what he's really doing," Reed suggested. "Going rogue with unauthorized neural manipulation of a military asset seems like something his superiors might frown upon." "It's not that simple," Harkins warned. "The entire program exists in a gray area of deniability. If confronted, the agency would simply disavow knowledge of Omega." Diana set her rifle case down carefully. "There's only one permanent solution. The implants need to be neutralized." "Is that even possible?" Wilson asked. "Theoretically." Diana touched the back of her neck. "The neural interfaces can be deactivated with a specific electromagnetic pulse sequence. It would render them inert without surgical removal." "And you know this sequence?" "No, but I know who does." Diana turned to Harkins. "Eleanor Wright. She was the lead scientist on the neural interface component of Whisper. She opposed Omega from the beginning." Harkins nodded slowly. "Eleanor left the program when they began pushing for control features rather than enhancement. Last I heard, she was working at a private research facility in Maryland." "We need to contact her," Diana insisted, "before Blackwood realizes his window is closed." As if summoned by her words, the tent flap snapped open. Richard Blackwood stood there, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him, four men in tactical gear formed a menacing backdrop. "I believe congratulations are in order," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Another impossible shot successfully executed, though not from your assigned position, Deanna." His eyes moved to the rifle case, then back to her face. "Always the independent operator. It's precisely this unpredictability that Operation Omega is designed to address." "The mission is complete, Blackwood." Wilson stepped forward. "Target eliminated, team returned safely. Your operation is unnecessary." "On the contrary, Commander." Blackwood smiled thinly. "It's now more necessary than ever. Diana has once again demonstrated both her exceptional abilities and her problematic tendency toward insubordination." He gestured to his men. "Secure the asset. Preparation for Phase 1 begins immediately." The operators moved forward, but Reed and Wilson stepped between them and Diana. Stand down, Wilson ordered. That's not happening. Blackwood's smile vanished. You're out of your depth, Commander. This goes far beyond your authority or understanding. He produced an official-looking document. Direct authorization from the Director of Operations. Diana Hayes is being reassigned to agency control effective immediately. Operational necessity supersedes military command structure in this instance. Wilson took the paper, scanning it quickly. His jaw tightened. These orders are specific to Operation Whisper, he noted, which officially ended in 1997. The classification remains active, Blackwood countered, as does the agency's authority over its assets. I'm not an asset, Diana's voice cut through the tension. I'm a soldier, and I don't consent to Omega activation. Blackwood turned to her, his expression now openly contemptuous. Your consent is irrelevant, Diana. It always has been. The neural interfaces you carry were never yours to control. The air in the tent seemed to thicken with tension. Wilson's hand had drifted to his sidearm. Reed stood ready beside him. Harkins had positioned himself protectively near Diana. This doesn't end well for you, Richard, Harkins warned quietly. Not if you push it. Always the sentimental fool, John. Blackwood shook his head. You've forgotten what's at stake. The program wasn't developed for eliminating occasional terrorists. There are greater threats, deadlier enemies. What are you talking about? Wilson demanded. Operation Nightshade, Blackwood replied. The real reason I'm here. We've confirmed a high-level penetration of U.S. government security. A foreign operative has compromised a senior official, possibly within the White House itself. The revelation landed like a bomb in the quiet tent. Even Diana looked surprised. We need Diana's abilities. Blackwood continued, his voice lowering. Not just the enhanced perception, but the perfect execution that only Omega can guarantee. A single shot under impossible conditions with zero margin for error or hesitation. He fixed Diana with an intent gaze. Thousands of lives could depend on it, perhaps the security of the nation itself. Diana didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was measured, controlled. If that's true, then I'll do what's necessary, but on my terms, not as a puppet with my neural pathways hijacked. Blackwood studied her calculation, evident in his eyes. You'd refuse to help prevent a potentially catastrophic attack. I didn't say that, Diana replied evenly. I said I won't submit to Omega. There's a difference. For a long moment, Blackwood seemed to weigh his options. Finally, he nodded. Very well. We'll proceed without full activation for now. But this operation requires absolute precision, Diana. One shot, one opportunity. If you hesitate, he let the implication hang in the air. I don't miss, Diana stated simply, and I only take the shot when it's right. Blackwood checked his watch. Transport leaves in 30 minutes. We're relocating to the secure facility outside D.C. As he turned to leave, he paused. One more thing. This operation is now classified 4 levels above your current clearance, Commander. Any discussion of what you've heard here would constitute a serious breach of national security. When Blackwood and his men had departed, Wilson turned to the others. Do you believe him about this Nightshade operation? Partially, Diana said. There's something he's not telling us. Richard never reveals his full hand. Harkins nodded agreement. The threat may be real, but I guarantee his response to it is self-serving. This is his opportunity to finally implement Omega using national security as justification. So what's our play? Reed asked. We just let Hayes go with him. We don't have much choice, Wilson admitted. Those orders were genuine, whatever his motives. Diana was already repacking her essential gear. I need to make contact with Dr. Wright. She's the only one who can help neutralize the implants. I'll reach out through back channels, Harkins promised, but it will take time. Then we buy time, Diana said decisively. I'll go with Blackwood, play along with the operation. But I need you to find Wright and get the deactivation sequence. Reed shook his head. That's too risky. What if Blackwood forces the activation anyway? He can't not without my cooperation, at least initially, Diana explained. The interfaces require a baseline neural state that's only achievable with my willing participation. Once that connection is established, then they could proceed without my consent. So you pretend to cooperate but never reach that baseline state, Wilson concluded. Exactly. Harkins looked troubled. It's dangerous, Diana. Richard knows you better than almost anyone. He'll be watching for deception. Then I'll have to be convincing. Diana closed her pack. It's the only way to end this permanently. As long as the implants remain active, I'll never truly be free. Wilson straightened, decision made. Reed, you're going to read in here. Official capacity as military liaison. Keep eyes on the situation and maintain secure communication channels back to us. Sir Blackwood won't allow that, Reed objected. He will when I inform him it's the condition for my not immediately reporting his operation to JSOC Command, Wilson said grimly. Two can play the leverage game. Harkins turned to Diana. I'll find Eleanor, whatever it takes. Diana nodded, then did something unexpected. She embraced the old sniper briefly. Thank you, John, for everything. As they prepared to depart, Reed caught Diana alone for a moment. This mission, what Blackwood's talking about, it's real. I believe so, Diana said quietly. But Richard's using it for his own ends. The threat lets him justify extraordinary measures. And you're still willing to go through with it. Diana looked out toward the mountains where the first hint of dawn was lightening the eastern sky. If there's a genuine threat to national security, I'll do what's necessary to eliminate it. That's my duty. Her eyes met Reed's, and in them he saw both resolution and a carefully guarded fear. But I do it as myself, not as someone's remote-controlled weapon. Reed nodded slowly. I've got your back, Hayes. For the first time since he'd met her, Diana smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her face. I know, Lieutenant. That's why you're coming along. As the first ray of sunlight broke over the mountain ridge, casting long shadows across the outpost, Diana Hayes shouldered her pack and walked toward the waiting helicopter. Whatever Blackwood had planned, whatever threats awaited in Washington, she would face them as she always had, on her own terms, listening to the wind, waiting for the perfect moment. Behind her, James Reed followed, still trying to understand the remarkable woman he'd come to respect in such a short time. One thing he knew with certainty, Diana Hayes was no one's weapon but her own, and he intended to make sure it stayed that way. Washington, D.C. gleamed in the late afternoon sun, its monuments and federal buildings radiating authority and permanence. Diana Hayes watched the city grow larger through the helicopter window, her face betraying nothing of her thoughts. Beside her, Lieutenant Reed sat in uncomfortable silence, while across the cabin, Richard Blackwood reviewed classified documents on a secure tablet. The transition from Afghanistan's rugged mountains to the polished power center of America had happened with disorienting speed. Only 18 hours earlier, Diana had been lying on a rocky outcropping, reading wind patterns to eliminate a terrorist leader. Now she was approaching the nerve center of a different kind of operation, one where the enemy remained shadowy, undefined. The helicopter banked, heading not toward the Pentagon or Langley, as Diana had expected, but toward a nondescript office building in Arlington. Nightshade Operations Center, Blackwood explained, noticing her questioning glance. Established specifically for this mission, completely isolated from regular agency networks. Seems excessive, Reed commented, even for a high-level counterintelligence operation. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. When you're hunting a ghost inside your own government, Lieutenant, there's no such thing as excessive security. The helicopter settled onto a rooftop landing pad. As they disembarked, Diana cataloged details with professional precision. 2 armed guards at the roof access door, surveillance cameras with overlapping fields of view, restricted elevator access requiring biometric confirmation. Inside, they descended to the 5th floor where a sophisticated operations center had been established. Analysts worked at computer terminals, satellite imagery displayed on wall screens, communications equipment hummed with activity. It had the focused intensity of a wartime command post, though the enemy here was invisible. A tall woman in her 50s approached her bearing military, despite the civilian clothing. Mr. Blackwood, assets secured. As requested, Colonel Monroe, Blackwood confirmed. Diana Hayes and our military liaison, Lieutenant Reed. Colonel Monroe studied Diana with open curiosity. So you're the one. I've read your file, or what wasn't redacted. Impressive. Diana nodded politely but offered nothing more. She had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than speech. Show them what we're facing, Blackwood instructed. Monroe led them to a secure briefing room where a digital display showed photographs of a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. Walter Kellerman, Monroe identified him, Undersecretary for Special Political Affairs at the State Department, 29 years of government service, highest security clearances, direct access to diplomatic communications with Russia, China, Iran, and a dozen other potential adversaries. She tapped a control, bringing up surveillance photos. 3 weeks ago, our counterintelligence team flagged unusual patterns in Kellerman's behavior. Private meetings outside normal channels. Encrypted communications we can't trace. 2 dead drops identified but never retrieved. Someone warned him we were watching. You think he's been turned? Reed asked. We thought that initially, Blackwood interjected, but the evidence suggests something more concerning. Monroe nodded. Facial recognition analysis, gait assessment, voice pattern comparison, all indicate subtle but measurable changes beginning approximately 4 months ago. She displayed side-by-side comparisons, showing minute differences in facial structure and expression. Our conclusion: this isn't Kellerman. It's someone surgically altered to replace him. Reed's disbelief was evident. That's impossible. The security protocols alone were compromised, Blackwood finished. We believe the real Kellerman was taken during a diplomatic trip to Geneva. The substitution is nearly perfect, down to personal mannerisms and knowledge of classified information. Where's the real Kellerman? Diana asked, her first words since entering the building. Monroe and Blackwood exchanged glances. Most likely dead, Monroe said flatly, though we have no confirmation. Diana studied the images. And the imposter, foreign intelligence operative, extremely sophisticated deep-cover agent with extensive resources behind him. Why not simply arrest him? Reed questioned. If you have this much evidence. Because we don't know who he's working with inside our government, Blackwood explained. Moving against him prematurely could alert others in the network. And we need to know what information has been compromised. More critically, Monroe added, Kellerman is scheduled to attend a classified security briefing with the president in 3 days. A briefing that will include nuclear response protocols and critical defense systems access. The implications hung heavy in the room. So where do I come in? Diana asked, though she already suspected the answer. Blackwood moved to the window, gazing out at the Washington skyline. Tomorrow morning at 07:30, the imposter posing as Kellerman will attend a diplomatic breakfast at the Westfield Hotel. It's the only opportunity we'll have before the presidential briefing. He turned back to face her. We need a clean elimination. No evidence of assassination. Nothing that could be traced back to U.S. intelligence operations. It needs to appear as natural as possible, a sudden health crisis. A heart attack, Diana concluded. Blackwood nodded. Precisely. A specialized round designed to deliver an undetectable toxin. Impact creates a small puncture that closes immediately. Toxin induces cardiac arrest within seconds. Medical examiners will find nothing suspicious. The shot itself presents unique challenges. Monroe continued, bringing up a schematic of the hotel and surrounding buildings. Kellerman will be seated near a window, but it's specially designed security glass. There's a ventilation system on the exterior wall with precisely spaced openings only 4 centimeters wide. She highlighted the target zone. The round would need to enter through one of these openings, which will be approximately 900 meters from the nearest viable shooting position. That's not the real challenge, Blackwood added. The hotel is surrounded by wind corridors created by the surrounding buildings. Unpredictable urban air currents constantly shifting. Most snipers would consider it impossible. Diana absorbed the information, silently, mentally calculating angles, trajectories, environmental factors. Her expression revealed nothing. One shot, Blackwood emphasized. No second chances, absolute precision required. And if I decline, Diana asked, though she already knew the answer, then a foreign agent potentially compromises our most sensitive national security protocols. Blackwood replied, I don't think that's an outcome either of us wants, Diana. Her eyes met his cold gray against calculating blue. I'll need time to prepare, study the wind patterns, map the currents. You have until tomorrow morning, Blackwood said. Everything you need will be provided. As they left the briefing room, Reed moved closer to Diana. You believe all this? He asked in a low voice. Most of it, she replied quietly. The technical details are consistent with an intelligence operation. The wind challenges are real. But, Diana glanced at Blackwood's retreating figure. Richard never tells the whole truth. There's something else happening here. They were shown to separate quarters within the secure facility, comfortable but clearly monitored. Diana found her equipment already delivered to her room, including her custom rifle and ammunition case. The specialized toxin round Blackwood had mentioned was stored separately in a temperature-controlled container. "I'll be down the hall," Reed told her at her door. "If you need anything." Diana nodded. "Try to contact Commander Wilson if you can, securely." "You think they're monitoring communications?" "I know they are." When Reed had gone, Diana surveyed her room methodically, noting the surveillance cameras with their subtly disguised lenses, the environmental controls that could be remotely adjusted, the tablet computer with restricted access. Not a prison, but close enough. She unpacked only what she needed, then moved to the window. Unlike most secure facilities, this one allowed occupants a view, perhaps because they were 5 stories up, or perhaps because Blackwood wanted her to see what she was protecting. The Washington Monument stood in the distance, illuminated against the darkening sky, a symbol of the nation she had sworn to defend. Diana's training had included extensive counterintelligence awareness. She understood the stakes if Blackwood's assessment was accurate. A foreign agent with access to the highest levels of government posed an existential threat. It was precisely the kind of mission the Whisper program had been designed to address. And yet, she closed her eyes, focusing on the subtle air movements in the room, letting her enhanced senses extend outward. The building's ventilation system created microcurrents she could feel against her skin. Beyond that, she sensed the larger patterns of the city, warm air rising from sun-heated concrete, cooler currents flowing from the Potomac, the complex dance of urban wind corridors between skyscrapers. Washington's winds were different from the mountains of Afghanistan or the deserts of Syria, more constrained, more influenced by human construction, but still readable to someone with her abilities. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. She opened the door to find a young woman in a lab coat carrying a medical case. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Dr. Abernathy. Mr. Blackwood asked me to check your physical condition before tomorrow's operation." Diana assessed the woman quickly, early 30s, nervous but professionally composed, likely genuine medical training, but not military. "That won't be necessary, doctor." "I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood was quite insistent." The woman's discomfort was evident. "Just routine monitoring, blood pressure, pulse, neurological baselines." Diana understood immediately. Neurological baselines meant establishing the reference state for the neural implants, the first step toward omega activation. "Please inform Mr. Blackwood that I'll submit to medical examination after I've had time to rest and prepare," Diana said firmly. "Operator's prerogative before a critical mission." Dr. Abernathy hesitated. "He said it was urgent." "So is my preparation," Diana replied, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Tomorrow morning will be soon enough." When the doctor had reluctantly departed, Diana returned to the window, thinking rapidly. Blackwood was moving faster than expected, unwilling to wait even a few hours before beginning Omega protocols, which meant either the threat was more imminent than they'd revealed, or his agenda had its own urgency. She needed to act quickly but carefully. Any obvious resistance would only accelerate Blackwood's timeline. Diana took out her notebook and began making wind calculations, genuine ones, as she knew she was being observed. She would give them exactly what they expected to see: a dedicated operative preparing methodically for a challenging assignment. Meanwhile, her mind worked on a different problem entirely. In a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the secure facility, John Harkins sat opposite a silver-haired woman whose elegant appearance belied her troubled expression. "They've actually done it," Dr. Eleanor Wright said, her voice hushed with disbelief. "After all these years, they have activated Omega." "Not yet," Harkins corrected. "But Blackwood is pushing hard. Diana's buying time, but I don't know how long she can hold out." Wright shook her head slowly. "I warned them when we developed the interfaces. The neural pathways were never meant for external control. Enhancement, yes. Manipulation, no." "Can they be deactivated?" Harkins asked, getting straight to the point. "It's complicated." Wright sighed. "The nanomaterials have integrated with her neural tissue over time. They can't simply be turned off without risk." "But there is a way." "Theoretically." Wright opened her tablet, displaying complex biochemical structures. "The interfaces are maintained by a specific protein complex that Diana's body produces in response to the original implantation. Interrupt that production cycle, and the nanomaterials gradually become inert." "How do we interrupt it?" "A precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulse coupled with a targeted pharmaceutical compound." Wright looked up at him. "I can synthesize the compound, but the delivery mechanism is problematic. It requires direct access to Diana's bloodstream and exact timing with the EMP. Harkins absorbed this. How long from administration to effect? The initial neutralization would begin within minutes. Complete deactivation would take hours, possibly days. In Blackwood, could he force Omega activation before the neutralization takes effect? Wright's expression darkened. If he's using the protocols, I think he is, yes. The activation is nearly instantaneous once initiated. We'd need to prevent it entirely, not counter it afterward. Harkins nodded grimly. Then we need to move fast. Commander Wilson is arranging emergency authorization through JSOC to supersede Blackwood's operation, but bureaucracy takes time. Time Diana may not have, Wright finished. She studied the old sniper's face. You care about her, beyond professional responsibility. I'm the reason she's in this situation, Harkins admitted. I recruited her, brought her into the program. Everything that's happened since is partly my responsibility. You couldn't have known what the agency would do with the technology. I suspected. Harkins' weathered face showed the weight of decades of classified operations. We all did. We just told ourselves it was for the greater good. Wright's eyes softened. And now I know better. Harkins' straightened, decision made. How quickly can you synthesize this compound? With the right equipment, 4 hours, maybe less. Then let's not waste time. He stood, leaving cash for their untouched coffees. I have access to a private lab through former contacts, and I have a plan to get us inside that facility. As they left, Harkins glanced up at the darkening sky. Unlike Diana, he couldn't read the wind, couldn't sense the invisible currents of the world. But after a lifetime in the shadows of covert operations, he could read the currents of power, and right now they were building toward a storm. Lieutenant Reed had spent his military career following rules and respecting chain of command. But as he made his way through the Nightshade facility, he found himself in unfamiliar territory, actively working against the objectives of the mission he'd been assigned to. He found Diana in a small preparation room she'd been granted access to, carefully examining specialized ammunition under a high-powered scope. Did you make contact? She asked without looking up. Yes, Reed confirmed. Secure call to Commander Wilson using the emergency protocol you suggested. He's received the information and is working with Harkins. Any progress with Dr. Wright? They've found her, working on something called a neutralization compound. Diana nodded slightly. Good. Did you check the shooting position they have assigned? Roof access to the Meridian building northwest corner. I verified the sight lines myself. Reed moved closer, keeping his voice low. It's legitimately a difficult shot, Hayes. Even without the wind factors, the ventilation openings are barely wide enough for a round to pass through. I've made harder shots. Have you, The question slipped out before Reed could stop it. Diana finally looked up from her work. Does it matter? I guess not, Reed admitted, but I'd like to know who I'm really dealing with here. The ghost of Korengal, the perfect shot who never misses, or just a soldier trying to do the right thing while fighting her own government. For a long moment, Diana was silent. Then unexpectedly, she offered him a small, genuine smile. Perhaps all of the above, Lieutenant. Before Reed could respond, the door opened and Blackwood entered, accompanied by Colonel Monroe. Final briefing, Blackwood announced without preamble. We've confirmed Kellerman, or rather his replacement, will be at the breakfast as scheduled. 7th floor dining room, northwest table. He'll be seated with his back to the ventilation system from 0730 to approximately 0859. Monroe displayed updated schematics on her tablet. Wind conditions are proving challenging. Urban temperature differentials are creating unpredictable currents between buildings. Our meteorological team estimates shifts every 8 to 12 seconds in the target corridor. That's within manageable parameters, Diana said calmly. For someone with your abilities, perhaps, Blackwood agreed. Which brings me to an important point. Dr. Abernathy reports you declined the pre-operation medical examination. I was preparing, it wasn't necessary. On the contrary, Blackwood's voice hardened slightly. Neurological baseline measurements are essential for this operation. The nature of the specialized round requires perfect synchronization with your shooting response. We need to calibrate the equipment accordingly. Diana recognized the lie for what it was. The toxin round required no such synchronization. This was Blackwood's pretext for beginning Omega protocols. I'll submit to the necessary measurements in the morning, she said evenly, after I've completed my wine calculations and had adequate rest. That's not optimal, Blackwood countered. We should proceed now. Richard, Diana met his gaze directly. You know my conditions. I perform at my best when I follow my established preparation protocols. You don't want to compromise the operation for administrative convenience. A tense silence filled the room. Reed watched the exchange with growing unease, recognizing the underlying conflict beneath the professional veneer. Finally, Blackwood nodded. Very well. First thing tomorrow, 0500, non-negotiable. After they had gone, Reed turned to Diana. That was about Omega, wasn't it? Yes, he's setting the stage. The medical examination is the first step in the activation protocol. Diana returned to her ammunition inspection. 0500 gives us very little time. For what? For John and Dr. Wright to complete their work. For Commander Wilson to secure the authorization we need. She looked up at him. And for us to determine whether eliminating the Kellerman imposter is actually necessary. Reed blinked in surprise. You're questioning the mission. I'm questioning Blackwood's motives, Diana clarified. The threat may be real, but his response to it feels convenient, too perfectly aligned with his Omega objectives. She carefully placed the specialized round back in its container. I need access to the raw intelligence on Kellerman. The facial recognition data, the surveillance reports, everything they use to conclude he's been replaced. They'll never grant that level of access. No, they won't, Diana agreed, which is why you'll need to get creative, Lieutenant. Reed stared at her. You want me to hack a CIA operation? Not hack, just access information we're technically cleared for but haven't been shown. Diana's expression remained calm. Your choice, of course. But if I'm going to potentially kill an American official tomorrow morning, I want to be absolutely certain he deserves it. Reed considered this military discipline warring with growing suspicion. I'll see what I can do. The night deepened over Washington, the city's lights creating a false dawn against the cloud cover. Diana stood at her window, sensing the gathering storm, both meteorological and metaphorical. Weather forecasts predicted rain by morning, another variable to consider in an already complex equation. A soft knock at her door broke her concentration. She opened it to find Reed, his expression grim. We need to talk, he said quietly. Not here. They made their way to a small courtyard in the center of the facility, one of the few areas without direct audio surveillance, though cameras still monitored the space. Rain had begun to fall, providing additional cover for their conversation. I accessed the intelligence files, Reed said, voice barely above a whisper. The facial recognition analysis surveillance reports everything. And it's inconsistent. The facial markers they're using to prove Kellerman was replaced, they're within standard deviation parameters for normal aging and stress response. Nothing that definitively indicates surgical alteration. Diana absorbed this. What about the behavioral evidence, the dead drops? That part checks out, Reed admitted. Kellerman has definitely been engaged in activities outside normal protocols. But the conclusion that he's been physically replaced by a foreign operative, the evidence doesn't support it. So either their analysis is flawed, Diana reasoned, or they're deliberately misrepresenting the situation. Reed nodded grimly. There's something else. I found a secured file, triple encrypted, accessible only to Blackwood. It mentioned collateral benefit from the Nightshade operation, meaning I couldn't access the details, but it referred to successful field demonstration of Omega capabilities and justification for expanded program implementation. Diana's suspicions crystallized into certainty. Blackwood is using Nightshade to prove Omega works. Kellerman might be a legitimate security concern, but the replacement theory creates justification for an assassination requiring my unique abilities. And once you've successfully demonstrated those abilities under Omega protocols, Reed began, the program gets expanded, Diana finished. More operatives, more control mechanisms. Blackwood gets his perfect assassins, and I become the proof of concept. They stood in silence as the rain intensified, both processing the implications. What do we do? Reed finally asked. If Kellerman is actually a security threat, even if he's not a foreign imposter. Also, we get more information, Diana decided. Before I take that shot, I need to know exactly what I'm doing and why. There's not much time. No, Diana agreed, but there's enough. Return to your quarters, Lieutenant. Act normal. I need to make preparations of my own. As Reed departed, Diana tilted her face to the rain, feeling each drop against her skin, calculating density trajectory, the effect of precipitation on urban wind patterns. Tomorrow's shot would indeed be challenging, perhaps the most difficult of her career. But the real challenge wouldn't be the wind or the distance or the tiny ventilation opening her bullet needed to pass through. It would be deciding whether to take the shot at all. At 04:55 the next morning, Diana sat calmly in the preparation room, equipment laid out precisely, weapon cleaned and checked. She had slept little, but that wasn't unusual before an operation. Her mind was clear, focused. The door opened precisely on schedule. Blackwood entered with Dr. Abernathy and two security personnel. "Good morning, Diana." Blackwood greeted her with professional courtesy. "I trust you are prepared for today's operation?" "Of course," she replied evenly, "though I still have questions about the intelligence assessment." Blackwood's expression tightened slightly. "The briefing was comprehensive. What questions remain?" "The evidence for Kellerman being physically replaced seems inconclusive. Facial recognition discrepancies are minimal within standard deviation for aging and stress." A momentary flash of surprise crossed Blackwood's face before his professional mask returned. "Our analysis incorporated multiple factors beyond facial recognition. The conclusion is sound." "Perhaps," Diana acknowledged, "but in my experience, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." "This isn't a scientific debate, Diana. It's a national security operation with confirmed intelligence." Blackwood gestured to Dr. Abernathy. "We need to proceed with pre-mission protocols." The doctor approached with medical equipment, standard vitals monitoring devices, but also a specialized neural scanner Diana recognized from her Whisper program training. "This will only take a few minutes," Dr. Abernathy assured her. "Basic vitals first, then a quick neural mapping scan to establish your baseline." Diana submitted to the blood pressure cuff and pulse monitor without objection. As the doctor worked, she addressed Blackwood again. "What happens after Kellerman, assuming the operation is successful?" "Containment and investigation," Blackwood replied. "With the immediate threat eliminated, we can work backward through his contacts, identify the network behind him. And my role will be acknowledged as critical to national security." Blackwood smiled thinly. "The Omega protocols will have proven their effectiveness. The program will continue with expanded applications, including more operations like me." "That's classified, Diana. You know that." Abernathy finished the standard vitals and reached for the neural scanner. Diana remained still, outwardly compliant. "This may cause a slight tingling sensation," the doctor explained, positioning the device near Diana's temples. "It's mapping synaptic patterns and neural activity." Diana knew it was doing much more, establishing the connection pathways for Omega activation, preparing her neural implants for external control. But she showed no resistance, maintaining the calm, professional demeanor expected of her. As the scanner hummed softly, the door opened, and Lieutenant Reed entered in full tactical gear. "Final position check complete, sir," he reported to Blackwood. "Weather conditions are deteriorating. Rain intensity increasing, wind gusts at 25 knots between buildings." "That complicates things," Blackwood frowned. "Will it affect the operation?" "I've accounted for the precipitation," Diana stated. "The wind patterns are complex but manageable." The neural scanner beeped, completing its initial mapping. "Baseline established," Dr. Abernathy announced. "Neural activity within optimal parameters for interface synchronization." Blackwood nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Excellent. Prepare the secondary protocol." The doctor removed a case from her medical bag, revealing a specialized injection system. "This is a neurochemical stabilizer," she explained to Diana. "It ensures consistent neural transmission during high-stress operations." Diana recognized it immediately, the chemical trigger for Omega activation. Once administered, the nanomaterials in her brain would become receptive to external control signals. She had perhaps 30 seconds to act before her window closed permanently. "Lieutenant Reed," she said calmly, "would you check my rifle scope calibration? I'm concerned about the rain effect on the optics." Reed moved to the weapon case, positioned as they had planned earlier. "Actually," Diana continued, "I'm feeling somewhat lightheaded from the neural scan. Doctor, could I have some water before we continue?" As Dr. Abernathy turned to retrieve a water bottle, Diana locked eyes with Reed and gave an imperceptible nod. In one fluid motion, Reed drew his sidearm, training it steadily on Blackwood. Step away from her, he ordered. Now. The security personnel reached for their weapons, but froze when Diana produced a small handgun from beneath her preparation table. That won't be necessary, gentlemen, she said quietly. This is not a hostile takeover, just a pause in procedures. Blackwood's face darkened with anger. What is this Diana treason? Hardly, she replied. Just due diligence. Lieutenant Reed has identified serious discrepancies in the intelligence assessment of Walter Kellerman. We're not proceeding until those are resolved. You have no authority. Actually, she does, a new voice announced from the doorway. Commander Wilson stood there flanked by military personnel in specialized tactical gear. Behind them were Harkins and a silver-haired woman Diana recognized from photographs as Dr. Eleanor Wright. Joint Special Operations Command has assumed control of this operation, Wilson stated, handing Blackwood an official document. By direct authorization of the Secretary of Defense, Nightshade has been redesignated as a military intelligence matter effective immediately. Blackwood scanned the document, his face flushing with fury. This is outrageous. The agency has primary jurisdiction. Not anymore, Wilson cut him off. Not when it involves unauthorized experimental procedures on military personnel. Dr. Wright has provided comprehensive documentation of the Omega protocols, including the parts you conveniently omitted from official records. Dr. Wright stepped forward, addressing Diana directly. The neural scanner has established the baseline connection, but without the chemical activator, the interfaces remain in passive mode. You're still in control. Diana nodded, lowering her weapon slightly. And Kellerman, is he a legitimate threat? Yes, Harkins confirmed, but not in the way Blackwood claimed. Our independent analysis confirms unusual behavior and potential security breaches. But he hasn't been physically replaced. He appears to be providing classified information to foreign interests, possibly under coercion. Which means, Wilson added, this is now an intelligence gathering operation, not an assassination. We need Kellerman alive to determine what's been compromised and why. Blackwood's composure cracked. You fools. Do you have any idea what's at stake? Kellerman has access to nuclear response protocols. If those are compromised, they're already being changed, Wilson informed him. New security measures implemented. The immediate danger has been contained. Blackwood turned to Diana, his voice lowering. We created you, Diana. Everything you are, everything you can do, it exists because of the program, because of me. No, Richard, Diana replied evenly. You enhanced what was already there. You didn't create it. She turned to Dr. Wright. The deactivation procedure, is it ready? Yes, Wright confirmed. A specialized EMP device calibrated to neutralize the nanomaterials combined with a compound that disrupts the protein maintenance cycle. It will render the interfaces permanently inert. Side effects: temporary headaches, possibly some sensory adjustment as your natural abilities recalibrate without enhancement. Nothing permanent. Diana nodded. Then let's proceed. I want these implants neutralized. You're making a mistake, Blackwood warned. Your abilities will be diminished. Your effectiveness compromised. My abilities existed before the implants, Diana countered. They'll remain after. Perhaps not as enhanced, but still mine. Still under my control. As the security personnel were removed and Dr. Wright prepared the deactivation equipment, Diana turned to Harkins. Thank you, she said simply. The old sniper nodded in understanding, all that remained unspoken between them. I should have done this years ago. You're doing it now, Diana replied. That's what matters. 3 months later, Diana Hayes stood on a windswept ridge in Montana, rifle cradled comfortably in her arms as she scanned the valley below. Beside her, James Reed adjusted his spotting scope, still learning to read the subtle signs of wind and weather that came so naturally to her. Thermals rising from the south slope, he noted, creating a clockwise rotation in the valley. Good, Diana approved. What else? Reed studied the landscape. Grass movement suggests a secondary current about 4 feet off the ground moving counter to the primary direction. Very good, Diana smiled slightly. You're learning to listen. In the months since Washington, much had changed. The Whisper program had been officially terminated, its files declassified for congressional review. Blackwood faced internal investigation for unauthorized human experimentation and falsification of intelligence. Walter Kellerman had been quietly removed from his position, and was cooperating with counterintelligence teams revealing the extent of his compromised information. Diana's neural implants had been successfully neutralized, the nanomaterials rendered inert within her brain tissue. As Dr. Wright had predicted, her abilities had recalibrated, slightly less enhanced than before, but still far beyond normal human perception. More importantly, they were now entirely her own, free from any possibility of external control. She had left active service, accepting Commander Wilson's offer to help train specialized reconnaissance and sniper teams. Not creating more like her that would never happen again, but teaching others to maximize their natural potential, to truly understand their environment, rather than simply fight against it. Reed had surprised everyone by requesting permanent assignment to her training unit. 2,000 yards. Diana indicated a small target barely visible in the valley below. Crosswind variable. What do you think? Reed calculated mentally. Difficult but doable, though I might wait for the wind to stabilize. Sometimes waiting is the right choice, Diana agreed. The perfect shot isn't just about skill, it's about patience. As they prepared for the training exercise, Diana felt the wind against her face, the same invisible force she had read all her life, first through natural ability, then with technological enhancement, and now through pure experience and instinct once again. She thought briefly of Damascus, of Michael Sullivan, of the shot not taken that had haunted her for so long. The pain had diminished over time, not forgotten, but accepted as part of what had shaped her. Ready when you are, Reed said, settling into position beside her. Diana took a deep breath, feeling the mountain air fill her lungs. The wind spoke to her as it always had, telling its secrets to those patient enough to listen. She had spent her life learning its language, and would continue to do so, not as a weapon, not as an asset, but as herself. I'm ready, she said, and meant it in more ways than one. As the sun cast long shadows across the Montana wilderness, Diana Hayes took aim, breathing in rhythm with the world around her, at peace with both her remarkable abilities and her simple humanity. The wind whispered, and she listened as she always would. 6 months after the events in Montana, Diana Hayes stood on the deck of a small cabin nestled in the Bitterroot Mountains. The morning air carried the scent of pine and the promise of snow. Winter was approaching, but today the sun broke through scattered clouds, warming her face as she closed her eyes and listened to the wind. It still spoke to her, though differently now. Without the neural implants, her abilities had returned to their natural state, still exceptional but more intuitive, less precise. Dr. Wright had explained the adjustment would take time, that her brain needed to relearn how to process sensory information without technological enhancement. Some days were harder than others, but the freedom was worth every moment of struggle. Diana heard the crunch of gravel and opened her eyes to see a familiar truck winding up the mountain road. She smiled, something that came more easily these days. The nightmares about Damascus had not disappeared entirely, but they no longer controlled her. The monthly sessions with the military psychologist, part of the agreement with Wilson, had helped her frame Michael's death not as her failure, but as a tragedy born of circumstances beyond her control. You can honor the dead by how you live, the therapist had told her, and so she did. The truck parked and John Harkins emerged, moving more slowly than before, but with the same purposeful dignity. At 73, he'd finally embraced retirement, though he still consulted occasionally with Wilson's specialized training program. You're late, Diana called. Harkins grinned, retrieving a package from the passenger seat. Got caught behind a logging truck. Some things even I can't predict. Inside the cabin, Reed was preparing coffee. He'd taken leave from active duty to help establish the training center in the valley below, a small specialized facility where Diana worked with selected recruits, teaching them to read the environment, to trust their instincts alongside their technology. The old man finally made it, Reed observed, handing Harkins a steaming mug. Respect your elders, Lieutenant? Harkins grumbled, though the warmth in his voice belied his words. He set the package on the table, a leather-bound journal with weathered edges. What's this? Diana asked, recognizing it immediately. My wind logs, Harkins said, from Desert Storm through Afghanistan. Thought they might be useful for your teaching program. Diana opened the journal carefully. Inside were decades of observations, not just ballistic data and wind calculations, but deeper insights, philosophical reflections on the nature of patience and precision. There's something else, Harkins said, his voice softening. He removed an envelope from his jacket pocket. This came from Michael Sullivan's parents. They want to meet you. Diana stilled her fingers, tracing the envelope's edge. They don't blame you, Harkins assured her. They've read the declassified reports. They know what really happened. Diana took a deep breath. I'll write to them tomorrow. Later, as the three sat on the deck, watching the sunset paint the valley in golden shadow, Diana shared her vision for the future, not just the training program, but the broader mission to reform how special operations approached human enhancement. Technology had its place, but never at the cost of autonomy. The program will focus on enhancing natural abilities without neural interfaces, she explained, working with what's already there, not forcing what isn't. Like you did with me, Reed noted, helping me hear the wind rather than just calculate it. Harkins nodded approvingly, teaching instead of controlling. That's the difference. As darkness settled over the mountains, Diana listened to the night wind beginning its dance through the pines. In the distance, lights from the training facility winked on where tomorrow a new group of recruits would arrive. I never thanked you properly, Diana said quietly to Harkins, for finding me as a child, for seeing something worth developing. The old sniper's eyes glistened in the fading light. I made many mistakes along the way. We both did, Diana acknowledged, but we found our way back. Harkins reached out, placing his weathered hand over hers. The gesture said everything words couldn't regret, for the past pride in the present, hope for the future. The wind picked up, whispering secrets only Diana could hear. But now those secrets were hers alone to interpret, her gift to share as she chose. No longer a weapon to be wielded by others, but a teacher guiding the next generation to listen, to understand, to wait for the perfect moment. And in that perfect moment, surrounded by the two men who had helped her reclaim her humanity, Diana Hayes finally found peace.